I knelt on the floor of our guest room with a box cutter shaking in my hand, and the smell coming out of that slit in the fabric was so thick I had to breathe through my mouth just to keep from gagging. And when the blade finally opened a gap wide enough to see inside, I found something wrapped in plastic that made me sit back on my heels and press my palm against my mouth, because I understood, in that single second, that my husband's family had been lying to me for 11 years. I had bought that box cutter at the hardware store 2 days earlier, telling myself I was being paranoid, telling myself that no sane woman cuts open a $4,000 mattress her mother-in-law gave her as a gift. But by the time I actually pressed the blade into the fabric, paranoid was the last thing I felt. I felt certain. My name is Odessa Vance, and before that February afternoon in Boulder, Colorado, I believed I understood my marriage completely. I was wrong about almost everything, and it started, of all places, with a smell that would not leave a guest room no matter how many candles I burned or windows I opened. Let me start from the beginning, because you deserve to know how a gift that was supposed to be an act of love turned into the moment my entire family came apart at the seams, literally. I met my husband, Grant Vance, at a real estate conference in Denver back when I was 26 and still believed charm was the same thing as character. Grant came from money, the kind of old Colorado money that builds subdivisions and names streets after itself, and his mother, Bernadette Vance, had spent 30 years running Vance Realty Group with a grip so tight that even Grant, her only son, sometimes seemed like an employee more than a child. Bernadette was polished in the way that made other women feel underdressed just standing near her. She wore cream-colored blazers even in July, kept her silver hair cut into a severe bob, and had a way of complimenting you that always left a small sting behind it, the kind of compliment that was really a correction wearing a nicer coat. When Grant introduced us at a company holiday party, Bernadette looked me over for exactly 3 seconds before saying, "Well, aren't you a breath of fresh air?" in a tone that made it clear she meant the opposite. I told myself that was just her personality. I told myself that for 11 years. We got married in a vineyard outside Boulder, a beautiful ceremony that Bernadette paid for almost entirely and therefore controlled almost entirely, down to the exact shade of ivory on the table linens. Grant worked under his mother at Vance Realty, managing the residential division, while Bernadette kept a firm hand on commercial properties and the family trust that funded most of it. I worked as a physical therapist at a clinic near downtown Boulder, a job I loved because it was mine, because no Vance had built it for me and no Vance could take it away. We bought a house together in a quiet neighborhood called Gun Barrel, a 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch that Grant said reminded him of his grandmother's place. And for the first several years, life felt ordinary in the best possible sense. We had a daughter, Josephine, who we called Josie, and a son, Wyatt, 2 years younger, and between work and school pickups and Bernadette's endless string of family obligations, the days blurred together the way they do when you are simply living instead of watching yourself live. The mattress arrived on a Tuesday in late January, delivered by 2 men in matching polo shirts who carried it up our staircase with the careful reverence of people handling something breakable. Bernadette had called ahead to tell me it was coming, her voice bright with an excitement I rarely heard from her. "It's the same brand the Ritz-Carlton uses," she said over the phone, "handmade, organic latex, the works. You deserve the best sleep, dear, especially with how hard you work." I remember standing in my kitchen holding the phone, genuinely touched, because in 11 years of marriage, Bernadette Vance had never once given me a gift that wasn't really a gift for Grant, or for the grandchildren, or for the image of the family. This one, she insisted, was for me specifically. She said my back had been bothering me, which was true. I had mentioned it once in passing months earlier, and I was oddly moved that she remembered. Looking back now, I understand that being moved was exactly the reaction she was counting on. There was only one strange condition attached to the gift, and at the time I brushed it off as one of Bernadette's usual quirks. She insisted the mattress go in the guest room on the 2nd floor, not our master bedroom. "It needs time to air out and settle before you sleep on it properly," she explained. "These luxury latex mattresses off-gas for a few weeks. It's better in a spare room first." I did not question this. I did not know enough about mattresses to question it. So the beautiful, cream-colored, impossibly heavy mattress went into our guest room, the same room where Bernadette herself stayed whenever she visited from her condo downtown, which, now that I think back on it, was suspiciously often that winter. She came by on a Thursday to check the fabric, she said, running her hand across the surface with an intensity that seemed odd for someone simply admiring a purchase. She came again the following week, letting herself in with the spare key Grant had given her years earlier without asking me, and I found her standing in the guest room doorway when I got home from work, just standing there, looking at the mattress like it owed her something. "Everything all right, Bernadette?" I asked, setting down my bag. She turned to me with that polished, sliding smile of hers. "Just making sure it's holding up. These things can be finicky." I thought nothing of it. Why would I? Mothers-in-law are strange creatures sometimes, possessive over gifts in ways that don't quite make logical sense, and I filed her behavior under the same category as her insistence on choosing our Christmas card photo 3 years running. It was only weeks later, when the smell started, that I began to understand there had been nothing finicky about that mattress at all. The smell crept in slowly, the way rot always does, so gradually that for the first week I genuinely believed I was imagining it. It started as a faint sourness, something between wet cardboard and spoiled dairy, noticeable only when you walked directly past the guest room door. I mentioned it to Grant on a Sunday evening while we were folding laundry. "Do you smell something weird upstairs, kind of sour?" Grant barely looked up from the towel he was folding. "Probably the humidifier. I'll check the filter." He checked the filter. The filter was fine. The smell got worse anyway, thickening over the following 2 weeks into something closer to spoiled meat left too long in a warm car, a smell that made Josie wrinkle her nose whenever she walked past that end of the hallway on her way to the bathroom. I called an exterminator, certain we had a dead mouse trapped in the wall somewhere, a reasonable assumption for an older colonial house with plenty of hidden crevices. The exterminator, a patient older man named Curtis, spent 40 minutes with a thermal camera checking behind the drywall and found absolutely nothing. "No heat signature, no droppings, nothing chewed," he told me, scratching his head. "Whatever's causing that smell, it's not a rodent. You sure it's not something in the room itself? Sometimes new furniture off-gasses pretty rough." I looked at the mattress sitting there in its pristine cream cover, looking as innocent as furniture can look, and something cold moved through me, even though I could not yet name why. I want to be honest about something, because this story only matters if I am honest. For most of that month, I gave Grant and Bernadette every possible benefit of the doubt, because that is what 11 years of marriage trains you to do. You build a scaffolding of excuses around the people you love, and every strange behavior gets absorbed into that scaffolding without much resistance. Bernadette was eccentric. Grant was distracted by a big commercial deal at work. The house was old, and old houses smell strange sometimes. I told myself these things while lighting scented candles that did nothing, while running an air purifier on its highest setting, while lying awake at 2 in the morning listening to the furnace click on and off and wondering, in the smallest, quietest part of my mind, why a gift meant to help me sleep better had instead become the reason I couldn't sleep at all. The turning point came on a Wednesday in mid-February, 9 days before Valentine's Day, when I came home early from work because a patient canceled and found Bernadette's car already parked in our driveway. This was not unusual on its own. She had a key. She came and went as she pleased, a habit Grant had never corrected because correcting his mother was not something Grant Vance knew how to do. What was unusual was what I saw when I quietly let myself in through the side door and climbed the stairs without announcing myself, out of nothing more than habit, the way you move through your own house without thinking about the noise you make. Bernadette was in the guest room. She had pulled back the fitted sheet and the mattress protector, and she was pressing her palm flat against the top of the mattress, her head tilted, listening or feeling for something I could not see. She had a small flashlight in her other hand, the kind you keep in a junk drawer for power outages, and she was running its beam slowly along one seam of the mattress like she was searching for a specific spot. "Bernadette." She startled so hard the flashlight clattered onto the floor. For one unguarded second, before her face rearranged itself to its usual composed mask, I saw something I had never seen on Bernadette Vance in 11 years, real fear. "Odessa, dear, you scared me." She laughed, too high, too fast, bending to retrieve the flashlight. I was just checking for moisture. These latex mattresses can develop mold if the room isn't ventilated properly, and with that smell you mentioned, I wanted to make sure it wasn't ruining my gift. It was a reasonable explanation. It was also, I realized as I watched her hands, delivered by a woman whose fingers were trembling slightly as she smoothed the sheet back into place. A woman who could not quite meet my eyes for the rest of that visit. A woman who left 20 minutes later without her usual parting instructions about the grandchildren's schedules or the family dinner planning she normally couldn't resist micromanaging. Something was wrong. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky has actually changed color. A pressure in the air that has no name yet, but announces itself anyway. That night I lay next to Grant in our bed and asked him directly, "Does your mother seem strange to you lately? About the mattress, I mean." Grant was quiet for a moment too long. "She's just particular about gifts, you know how she is. She was in there today with a flashlight, checking the seams like she was looking for something specific." "Odessa, it's a mattress." He rolled over, effectively ending the conversation, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, cataloging every strange detail of the past month like puzzle pieces that refused to form a picture I could recognize. The insistence on the guest room instead of our own bedroom. The repeated unannounced visits. The way she checked the mattress like she was checking on a living thing. The smell that no exterminator, no humidifier filter, no scented candle could explain away. I did something the next morning that I am not proud of, but that I do not regret. I went into Grant's home office while he was in the shower, and I opened the file cabinet where he kept old paperwork, tax documents, warranty information, the boring architecture of a marriage. I was not looking for anything specific. I told myself I was looking for the mattress receipt, to check the return policy, to see if perhaps we could simply send the thing back and end this slow torment of sour air seeping through our upstairs hallway. What I found instead was a folder labeled, in Bernadette's own handwriting, RC Confidential, tucked behind old insurance statements in a place clearly meant to be overlooked. My hands went cold before I even opened it. Some instinct, some ancient warning system buried deep in every woman who has ever sensed she is standing at the edge of a truth she cannot unknow, told me to close that drawer and walk away. I did not listen to it. Inside the folder were bank transfer records going back nearly 9 years, wire transfers of $2,000 a month, sometimes more around certain dates, all routed through a private account under Bernadette's name to someone with the initials RC. There were also photographs, several of them, printed on regular paper like someone had done it quickly at a home printer rather than a professional lab. The photographs showed a woman I did not recognize, dark-haired, maybe a few years younger than me, holding a baby in one photo and standing beside a young boy of maybe 7 or 8 in another, more recent one. In the most recent photograph, the boy looked to be about 10 years old, and something about the shape of his jaw, the particular slope of his eyebrows, made my stomach drop before my mind had even finished processing what I was looking at, because I had seen that exact jawline, that exact eyebrow shape, in photographs of Grant as a child that sat in a silver frame on Bernadette's own mantel. I sat down hard on the office floor, the folder open in my lap, and I do not know how long I stayed there before I heard the shower shut off down the hall. I did not confront Grant that morning. I want to explain why, because I imagine some of you watching this would have marched straight into that bathroom with the folder in hand, and maybe that would have been the braver choice, but I have never regretted needing to understand the full shape of a thing before I act on it. 11 years of marriage had taught me that Grant, when cornered, did not offer truth easily. He offered the version of truth that caused the least immediate friction, a smooth, plausible explanation delivered with just enough sincerity to buy himself time to construct a better one. If I confronted him with a folder and a half-formed suspicion, he would talk his way around it before I even understood what I was truly asking. So instead, I put the folder back exactly as I found it. I kissed him goodbye like it was any ordinary Thursday, and I drove to work with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, turning the pieces over and over in my mind. A monthly payment stretching back 9 years. A woman with the initials RC, a boy who looked enough like my husband to be his twin at that age, and a mattress that Bernadette Vance had personally selected, personally delivered, and personally, obsessively, checked on with a flashlight in the dark. I did not yet understand the connection between the folder and the mattress. That understanding came 2 days later, on the Saturday before Valentine's Day, when Grant took the kids to his mother's condo downtown for what he called a grandma sleepover. Something Bernadette arranged periodically, always on weekends when, I now realized with a chill, Grant would also be occupied elsewhere for several hours running errands for her, always conveniently leaving me alone in the house. That Saturday afternoon, alone in a quiet house for the first time in weeks, I stood in the doorway of the guest room and looked at that beautiful, cursed mattress, and I finally let myself ask the question I had been avoiding. What if the smell was never mold? What if the smell was never off-gassing? What if Bernadette Vance had not given me a gift at all, but a hiding place? And what if the reason she kept coming back to check on it was that whatever she had hidden inside was starting to come apart? I went to the garage and got the box cutter. My hands were not steady as I pulled back the fitted sheet and the mattress protector, the same ones Bernadette had lifted with such careful, searching hands 2 weeks earlier. Up close, the smell was unbearable, a wet, organic rot that seemed to pulse stronger the longer I knelt there. I ran my palm along the seams the way I had seen Bernadette do, and near the center of one long side, close to where the flashlight beam had lingered that day, I found it, a section of stitching that looked slightly different from the rest, slightly newer, slightly less uniform. The kind of stitching a person does by hand rather than the factory machine that assembled the rest of the mattress. I pressed the blade of the box cutter against that seam and I cut. Fabric parted easily, too easily, like it had been opened and resewn more than once already. Beneath the outer cover was a layer of foam that had been hollowed out, carved into a cavity roughly the size of a shoebox, and inside that cavity, wrapped in layers of plastic that had clearly failed to hold their seal, was the source of everything. There were bundles of cash, tens of thousands of dollars by the look of it, some bills spotted black with mold where moisture had gotten in through a torn seam in the plastic. There was a small waterproof document pouch, the kind people keep passports in, containing what I would later learn were birth certificate copies, old bank statements, and a handwritten letter in Bernadette's own precise handwriting. And there was something else, something that made the sour, rotting smell suddenly make horrible sense. A sealed bag of what had once been fresh flowers, roses specifically, now reduced to a black, liquefying mass of decayed plant matter that had been tucked in alongside the cash. And I understood, kneeling there in that ruined guest room with bile rising in my throat, that the flowers had been placed there deliberately, as a decoy, so that if anyone ever noticed a smell and went looking, they would find rotting flowers and assume that explained everything, never suspecting there was more hidden beneath them. I sat back on my heels, and for a long moment I simply could not move. I read the letter first, because the letter, more than the cash, more than the documents, was the thing that finally gave the whole nightmare a shape. It was addressed to no one, more of a private record than a letter meant to be sent, dated almost a decade earlier, and it explained, in Bernadette's clipped, businesslike prose, everything I needed to know and more than I ever wanted to. 9 years earlier, before Grant and I had been married even 3 years, Grant had a brief relationship with a woman named Renata Castellano, a bookkeeper who had worked temporarily at Vance Realty Group during a busy commercial closing season. The relationship, according to Bernadette's own account, lasted only a handful of months and ended when Renata discovered she was pregnant. Grant, the letter stated with chilling matter-of-factness, had asked his mother to handle the situation, and handling the situation meant Bernadette negotiating directly with Renata, offering a substantial one-time settlement in exchange for her silence. A settlement Renata refused, choosing instead an ongoing monthly arrangement to help raise her son, a boy named Micah, on the condition that neither Grant nor the Vance family ever publicly acknowledged the child. Bernadette had structured the payments in cash, specifically, to avoid any traceable pattern that might surface during the periodic financial audits Vance Realty underwent as part of its commerc. Aisle lending relationships, audits that, the letter noted, had become more frequent and more invasive in recent years after a business partner grew suspicious of unexplained fund movements. The mattress, it turned out, was never really a gift to me at all. It was the newest hiding place for a stash of hush money that could no longer safely sit in a safety deposit box or a home safe, because an increasingly aggressive forensic audit into Vance Realty's finances, triggered by a minority investor demanding transparency after Grant expanded too aggressively into a risky development project, meant that every asset connected to Grant or Bernadette was suddenly vulnerable to scrutiny. A mattress gifted to a daughter-in-law, insured under her name, sitting in her house, was, Bernadette had apparently calculated, the last place anyone would think to look. I do not know how long I knelt there on that floor, the letter shaking in my hands, before the full weight of it settled into my chest. 11 years. I had been married to Grant for 11 years, and for 9 of them, he had a son he had never told me about. A boy I had unknowingly funded a fraction of every time Grant handed his mother money for the family trust or a business expense. A boy whose existence had been so carefully buried that his own father's wife had to slice open a mattress with a box cutter to find out he existed at all. I thought of Josie and Wyatt asleep at their grandmother's condo that very night, and I thought of a boy named Micah somewhere in the city, maybe going to school not 15 minutes from our house, who shared their father's jaw and their father's eyebrows and none of their father's last name. And something in me that had been holding steady through 11 years of small slights and quiet accommodations simply broke. I photographed everything. The cash, the documents, the letter, the ruined mattress, all of it, with a steadiness of hand that surprised even me. Because somewhere underneath the devastation was a cold, clear voice telling me that I would need proof, that Grant and Bernadette between them had spent a decade constructing a version of reality where I knew nothing and needed to know nothing. And I was not about to let that construction survive contact with evidence simply because it made everyone else more comfortable. Then I called the one person I trusted to help me think clearly when everything in me wanted to scream, my older sister Fabiola, who had spent 20 years working as a paralegal, and who answered on the second ring already alarmed by the sound of my voice. Odessa, what happened? I told her everything, the smell, the flashlight, the folder, the mattress, the boy named Micah, the money rotting in a bag alongside decaying roses like some grotesque metaphor Bernadette had accidentally built for her own guilt. Fabiola was quiet for a long moment when I finished. "Do not confront either of them yet," she said finally. "Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with. If Vance Realty is under a forensic audit and there's undisclosed cash flow connected to it, this isn't just a family secret anymore, Odessa. This could be relevant to fraud. You need to talk to a lawyer before you talk to Grant." I spent that Saturday night alone in a house that suddenly felt like a stranger's, unable to sleep in our bedroom, unable to look at the wrecked mattress in the guest room, sitting instead at the kitchen table with the photographs spread in front of me like a woman laying out a hand of cards she never wanted to be dealt. I thought about the version of my marriage I had believed in that morning, imperfect but solid, built on 11 years of shared holidays and school pickups and quiet Tuesday nights, and I thought about the version I now understood to be true. A marriage where my husband had a hidden son he paid to keep hidden, where my mother-in-law had used my own home, my own gift, as a vault for money she needed to disappear. Where every strange visit and every unexplained smell had an explanation so much darker than mold that I almost wished I had never picked up that box cutter at all. Almost. I did not confront Grant when he came home the next afternoon with the children, cheerful and sunburned from an outing to the science museum Bernadette had apparently sprung for at the last minute, the kind of grand, generous gesture she performed whenever she needed to distract from something. I watched him unload backpacks and lunchboxes with an ordinary tenderness that made my chest ache, because I understood now that the man I had loved for 11 years and the man capable of what that letter described were somehow the same person, and reconciling those two men inside one body was going to take longer than a single confrontation could accomplish. Instead, I did what Fabiola advised. On Monday morning, I met with a family law attorney named Priscilla Unset, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Fabiola had worked with years earlier, and I laid everything out for her: the documents, the photographs, the pattern of cash transfers, the timeline of Bernadette's visits. Priscilla listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather notebook, and when I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression somewhere between sympathy and something sharper, something closer to professional interest. "This is more complicated than infidelity," she said. If what you're describing is accurate, Bernadette may have structured these payments specifically to obstruct a financial audit tied to Vance Realty's lending relationships. That's not just a family matter anymore. That potentially crosses into fraud and obstruction, and depending on how the company's trust documents are structured, it could affect your own financial exposure as Grant's spouse. I want you to make copies of everything, store them somewhere Grant and Bernadette cannot access, and I want you to think carefully about whether you want to handle this privately first or bring in a forensic accountant immediately. I chose to handle the first conversation privately, not out of mercy, but out of a need to look Grant in the eye and hear, in his own voice, whether he would tell me the truth before I forced it out of him with evidence. That conversation happened on Tuesday evening, after the children were asleep, in the same kitchen where I had spent Saturday night sorting through the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. I did not ease into it. I set the folder on the table between us, along with the photographs, and I watched the color drain out of Grant's face as he understood, piece by piece, exactly what I had found. Odessa, I can explain. You have a son, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. You have had a son for 9 years, and you let your mother hide the payments for him inside a mattress in our guest room. Grant's hands were shaking as he reached for the photographs, and when he spoke, his voice cracked in a way I had never heard before, not even when his own father died 6 years earlier. It happened before we got serious, before we were engaged. Renata worked at the office for one summer. It was a mistake, Odessa, one mistake, and by the time I found out about Micah, you and I were already talking about getting married, and I panicked, and my mother told me she would handle it, that she would make sure Renata and the baby were taken care of quietly. And I let her, God help me, I let her because it was easier than telling you the truth and watching you leave. So instead you let me live 11 years believing something that was never true, I said. You let me raise our children in a house funded partly by a company under federal financial scrutiny because your mother needed to hide cash from auditors, and you let her put that cash inside a gift given to me, in my name, so that if anyone ever found it, I would be the one standing there holding it. Grant did not have an answer for that, because there was no answer that made it better, and I watched something in his face collapse the way a building collapses when the support beams finally give out after years of quiet, invisible strain. The days that followed moved with a strange, clinical speed that felt almost separate from my body, as if I were watching my own life unfold from several feet outside it. Priscilla brought in a forensic accountant named Desmond Acaffer, a careful, precise man who reviewed the documents from the mattress alongside financial records Priscilla subpoenaed from Vance Realty Group as part of the growing legal picture. And what they found over the following weeks confirmed something even I had not fully anticipated. The cash payments to Renata Castellano were only the visible edge of a much larger pattern. Bernadette had been quietly diverting funds from the family trust for years, some to cover the payments to Renata, but a significant portion to cover losses from the same risky development project that had triggered the minority investor's suspicion in the first place. Losses she had hidden from Grant himself in order to protect the image of Vance Realty as a company under sound, stable leadership. Grant, it turned out, was not merely the husband keeping a secret son from his wife. He was also, unknowingly in part and willfully in part, the public face of a company his own mother had been quietly hollowing out for years, propped up by concealed debt, and in at least 3 instances, Desmond flagged for the auditors. Falsified expense reports bearing signatures that were not entirely Grant's own, but close enough to pass a casual glance. I confronted Bernadette myself on a cold Thursday afternoon in her downtown condo, surrounded by the same polished, controlled elegance she had always projected. And for the first time in 11 years, I watched that elegance crack completely. You used me, I said, standing in her doorway with the folder in my ha. ND, you used my home and my name to hide money from an audit that could put your own son in legal jeopardy, and you let me live for weeks with the smell of rotting flowers you planted next to the cash as a decoy. Bernadette's face, usually so composed, twisted into something I had never seen on her, not quite guilt, more a kind of cornered fury at having finally been caught. I did what was necessary to protect this family, she said. Everything I have ever done has been to protect this family, including you and those children, whether you understand that or not. You didn't protect me, I said. You protected yourself, and you were willing to let me be the one holding the evidence if it all fell apart." She had no answer for that either, and I left her condo that afternoon understanding that some people, even at the very end of every excuse available to them, will still choose to believe their own justification over the plain, ugly truth of what they did. The forensic audit, once it fully unfolded over the following months, confirmed enough irregularities that Vance Realty Group entered a formal restructuring under new outside management, with Bernadette stepping down from her role entirely under the terms of a settlement negotiated to avoid a lengthier criminal investigation into the falsified documents. Grant was not implicated in the falsification itself. Desmond's forensic work made clear that his mother had acted largely without his direct knowledge on the financial side, though the child support arrangement he had knowingly hidden from me for 9 years remained. In my eyes, its own unforgivable category of betrayal, separate from anything Bernadette had orchestrated with the company's books. I filed for divorce in April, 8 weeks after that Saturday afternoon on the guest room floor. Grant did not contest it, and in the strange, quiet honesty that sometimes only arrives after everything has already been destroyed, he told me during one of our final conversations that some small part of him had felt relief the moment I found that folder, because it meant he no longer had to be the architect of his own lie. I believed him, and I also understood that his relief did not undo 11 years of my own life, built on a foundation he and his mother had quietly sabotaged from underneath. The children stayed primarily with me in the Gunbarrel house, which I kept as part of the settlement, though I had that guest room completely gutted and rebuilt before I ever let myself sleep peacefully in that house again, the ruined mattress hauled away by a disposal service along with every trace of what it had once concealed. I reached out to Renata Castellano myself, several months later, not out of obligation, but because I could not stop thinking about a 10-year-old boy who had spent his entire life as a carefully guarded secret, existing everywhere except in the family photographs on his own father's side. Renata was guarded at first, understandably wary of a woman connected to the family that had spent 9 years insisting she and her son remain invisible, but over several careful conversations, something like understanding grew between us. Two women who had both, in different ways, been managed and minimized by the same family. I never became close with Micah. That would have been a strange and complicated thing to force. But Josie and Wyatt eventually met their half-brother, cautiously, on terms Renata and I built together rather than terms dictated by Grant or Bernadette. And watching my children sit at a picnic table, getting to know a sibling they never knew existed, laughing over something as small as a shared love of dinosaurs, felt like one small, genuine piece of good finally growing out of all that wreckage. People sometimes ask me whether I regret cutting open that mattress, whether some part of me wishes I had simply lived with the smell, replaced it eventually, moved on without ever knowing what was hidden inside. I understand the question, because the truth I found cost me my marriage, my mother-in-law's approval, and 11 years of a story about my own life that turned out to be only half true. But I do not regret it, not for one single day, because a marriage built on a hidden son and a mattress stuffed with rotting hush money was never actually the marriage I believed I had. It was only a very convincing imitation of one. And no amount of comfortable ignorance is worth living inside an imitation when the real thing, however painful to uncover, is the only thing that actually belongs to you. I moved forward slowly that year, rebuilding a life around honesty instead of performance, watching my children grow up in a house finally free of secrets buried in the walls or the furniture or the careful silences around the dinner table. Peace did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way most real things do, in small, deliberate pieces, a full night's sleep in a room that finally smelled like nothing. But clean air, a Saturday morning with my children that belonged entirely to us, a quiet certainty, hard one, that whatever I built next would be built on a foundation I could trust because I had chosen every part of it myself. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you found something like that hidden inside a gift from someone you trusted? Would you have confronted them immediately or gathered proof first the way I did? Share your perspective in the comments below, and if you enjoy real stories about betrayal, resilience, and the courage it takes to face an uncomfortable truth, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.